Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. Since 2016, I've been sharing videos about Norse language, myth, and related subjects on my online video channel. And periodically, I need to update my frequently asked questions video. And so here I am answering all of your most frequently asked questions. How often do you update your channel? I aim for twice a week. I'm pretty consistent about Wednesdays, and then the other video is typically uploaded on Saturday. Sometimes I've experimented with Friday. It's possible at some point I'll move to doing that more consistently. I do skip some holidays or days very close to holidays, especially in November and December. And then occasionally, if there's some kind of particular occasion, I'll post more than 2 videos a week to try to coincide with something else, a movie release or a holiday that a video is particularly connected with or something like that. How can I get in touch with you? Please use the contact form on my website, jacksonwcrawford.com. Those emails will be read and received by my assistant Stella, and those that require a response from me will be forwarded to me. Keep in mind we cannot respond to all communications as there's simply too many, and we both have too many other things to do. Have you done or will you do a video on X? Well, to check whether I have, go to my website at jacksonwcrawford.com and look at the list of videos, which is organized by playlist and is pretty searchable just by Control F, right? And you can see if I've talked about a subject you're interested in. If there's something that I haven't talked about for sure and you would like to make sure that I'll talk about it sometime, reach out on Patreon. And I'm always willing to entertain video requests from Patreon supporters, although it may take me a while to get to a particular one. Why don't you talk more about Celtic or Slavic or some other language or mythology, maybe Old English? Well, while I have a basic familiarity with a lot of other old languages and a lot of other mythologies, those are not my specialty, and I know how easy it is to make mistakes about something that you're not fully informed about. I also know there are plenty of other people out there who really do specialize in these things and who ought to be out here trying to make their expertise accessible to the public, like I'm trying to do with Norse language and myth. And so I don't want to step on their toes if someone like that does come along. By just, because if I'm talking about these things, I'm going to be repeating something somebody else said, right? All I can do is kind of second-handed. Whereas with Norse sources, obviously I can appreciate and interpret and translate the original sources with great expertise. So I leave other people's fields to those people, and I hope that they'll emerge to talk about their subjects of expertise online before long too. Why haven't you answered my comment on YouTube? Because I've never seen it. The same answer goes to most emails, Facebook messages. I don't use Facebook. I have an account as a placeholder, right? There are too many people trying to reach me with their questions, their criticisms, whatever, and I just don't have time for it and also actually do my jobs. If you have something that you really need to say, reach out on my website, jacksonwcrawford.com, using the contact form, and my assistant Stella forwards messages from that address that require my attention. Stella can also answer a lot of questions, especially about the YouTube channel. Will you translate something into Old Norse or runes for me? Fundamentally, no. I used to do this for Patreon supporters before the amount of demand, even from Patreon supporters, got too high. So now I only do translations into Old Norse or runes for paying customers, especially film, television, video games, that kind of thing. Rates are on my website, and previous customers have included Disney. I worked on Frozen and on Frozen 2, and a project that I think might be even bigger that I can't talk about until sometime much later in 2020. Do you offer online classes? No, not at this time. Not only are we not offering classes formally through the University of Colorado in my department at this time, but in as much as CU is transitioning towards some online classes, there's still online classes for CU students. I also don't offer any formal online classes through any online universities or similar programs, partly because I just don't have time, especially for the amount of homework that one would have to assign. Keep in mind, I do have 4 primary jobs, and I'm not about to add a 5th one. Will you talk on my podcast? Typically, I'm going to say no as a default answer just because of time constraints and because I get tired of saying the same stuff 50 times. However, if you have a great pitch, real fun podcast, real awesome podcast, feel free to use the contact form at jacksonwcrawford.com to reach out to my assistant and, maybe it's happened before. Can you come do a talk or signing at my local bookstore, college, library, etc.? Typically, of course, travel of that kind is fairly expensive and thus difficult to do. However, if you have a venue that you think would be open to a talk about Norse language myth or my translations thereof, try it out with them, see if they'd be interested, and if so, maybe we can move forward to arranging some kind of an event. However, keep in mind that for people who are not into Norse language and myth, they usually have no idea how popular it is with certain people, and thus tend to think that such events would be poorly attended, and so they don't want to arrange them. How can I learn Old Norse? Well, not very many universities offer classes, but I do have an entire video, which I'll link in a card in the top right here, which explains some of the good resources that are available for studying Old Norse on your own. Keep in mind that many old-fashioned resources, such as the ones that you'll usually find in public domain and thus reproduced online, are not designed for people in 2019 who have not studied Latin and Greek extensively in school, and may also often use very archaic English in their descriptions and definitions of Old Norse. I do have some videos that cover basic grammatical patterns in Old Norse, what we call inflections, declensions, and conjugations for people who've studied Latin, and also a few videos that talk about things like pronunciation and vocabulary. There's a playlist of Old Norse lessons, which I'll link in the top right in a card. Why do you say Thor, isn't it Tor or Tur? Well, the Scandinavian languages have actually changed since the Old Norse period. A lot of people are aware of that, but sometimes you will run into people who have learned, especially Norwegian, Swedish, Danish as a heritage language, who think that that must have been how Vikings spoke, and it is not. Another version of this is, why don't you sound like modern Icelanders? And well, even Icelandic has changed, although it's changed in a less dramatic way than the continental Scandinavian languages. So whenever I read Old Norse or use an Old Norse name or show you Old Norse on the screen, what you're seeing is Old Norse in the 1200s or so typically. That's what our sort of classical Old Norse is. That's when the Eddas and Sagas were written down. And we're actually pretty well informed and can make very educated estimates about the pronunciation of Old Norse in that period. So that's what I'm following, instead of any modern Scandinavian languages standards. Why are your runes so bad? Well, they're not. The reason people ask this is because all they know is the Elder Futhark runic alphabet, when in fact that precedes in time the Old Norse language, which before it was written in the Roman alphabet, of course in most of our texts in Old Norse, the Sagas and Eddas are in the Roman alphabet, was written in the Younger Futhark, not the Elder Futhark. So when you look at my work in runes in something like Disney's Frozen or Frozen 2, or other TV shows, video games, things that might be forthcoming, you're going to see Younger Futhark, actual Viking age lettering, instead of the Elder Futhark, which tends to be kind of all the internet knows about, but I guess that probably has to do with the fact that it sounds cooler, right? Elder instead of younger, but they're both old from our perspective. Why do you say Frigg and Hel and sometimes Valhall, and not Frigga, Hela, Valhalla? Well, a lot of Old Norse nouns and names that are feminine in gender end in A. So Froya, for example, is a great example of that. But most don't, unlike, say, a Romance language. However, in the 18th and 19th centuries, when these stories were first being translated into modern European languages, a lot of the translators wanted to give a more classical, more romance, perhaps a little bit more tame-ish kind of look to some of these names. And so they added A's to feminine words and names to make them look more classical, more romance. That's where you get Frigga, Hela, Valhalla, whereas the actual Norse forms of those names are Frigg, Hel, and Valhall. Valhalla is so well established that I often say it, but Frigg and Hel are the true forms of the names of those goddesses in the realm of Hell, and I never say them with the A form, although I know that's what's used in Marvel Comics. It is not the true Old Norse form. What is the Old Norse word for blank? Well, Stella, my assistant, and I, we get too many requests for this sort of thing to honor all of them, but what you ought to do is go find the Cleesby-Vigfusson Dictionary of Old Norse. Keep in mind, it's very old-fashioned English. It's very 19th century English, and pretty old-fashioned for the 19th century anyway. So you need to spell things old-fashioned or British, right? Honor, H-O-N-O-U-R for us Americans. And think about what words meant to somebody 200 years ago who spent all of his time drinking tea and thinking about the Middle Ages. But with that being said, if you download it as a text file, which you can, at least in November 2019, at the University of Pennsylvania mirror of the Cleesby-Vigfusson Dictionary, you can then back search it. That's probably the easiest way to figure it out. Other things you can do is if you find an English Icelandic dictionary, there's only one that I'm aware of you can get easily in English-speaking countries that's any good. Often that'll get you pretty close, and you can then check that word against similarly spelled words in the Old Norse dictionary like Cleesby-Vigfusson, maybe get your Old Norse word. Do keep in mind that if you're using that text file of the Cleesby-Vigfusson dictionary, that it is badly OCR'd, so you're going to have to go through and find replace a lot of nonsense symbols with, ev and vowels with length marks and things like that. What are the best books to read? I have a video that's actually called recommended books in Norse language and myth or something like that. Some Norse book recommendations may be the actual title. You can find that either on the list of videos on my website at jacksonwcrawford.com or just search, the video platform for it. I will probably make an updated version of that before too long. How and where can I buy your books? Well, I'm flattered by the question. Actually, most bookstores can get them pretty easily, although you're not likely to find them on the shelves of Barnes & Noble because general managers of bookstores often don't realize how popular Norse mythology is. You can usually you can get a bookstore to order them. Some people worry about ordering on Amazon because some authors have deals, I understand, where royalties on Amazon may not be as good. I don't believe that's the case with me. I think my royalties are based on just number of copies sold wherever, however, so feel free to buy them on Amazon. Or you can also get them directly from my publisher, Hackett Publishing, as well as at Grimfrost in Sweden, which delivers to most countries. Can I quote your book, as in one of my own publications, or on a podcast, or on a website or something like that? My publisher and I have not typically contested single stanzas or occasional stanzas quoted as part of a larger, especially academic project. For example, you might have a book about apocalyptic beliefs in different cultures, and you might quote a stanza from my translation of Völuspá. That sort of thing is almost always fine. We do contest large-scale quoting without permission, as in, the entire translation of Völuspá or the Cowboy Hávamál, which has been reproduced in a lot of places online without our permission. So do ask. The best place to write to actually at this time, as I'm speaking in November 2019, is permissions@hackettpublishing.com. The permissions people at my publisher typically get back about these requests pretty fast. Can I get an autographed copy of your book? Well, I'm flattered by the request, but it's generally very logistically difficult to do this. So for the most part, we have to answer no. However, do reach out to the Boulder bookstore, as they sometimes have signed copies of my books in stock. Also, on the rare occasions that I'm able to do public events, talks and signings at different bookstores or wherever, I will generally be able to do a signing there. Are audiobooks of your books available? Yes. In 2018, I read the Poetic Edda as well as the Saga of the Volsungs with the Saga of Ragnar Lothbrok for audiobook versions, which are now available from Blackstone Publishing. You can get them on Amazon and most other places you can get audiobooks. Do your books include the Old Norse text? Yes and no. So in the Poetic Edda, Stories of the Norse Gods and Heroes, and then in the Saga of the Volsungs with the Saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, there is only my English translation with introduction. In the Wanderer's Havamal, there is, however, the original Old Norse text of Havamal derived directly from the Codex Regius manuscript, together with the translation as well as a commentary. And that may also lead to a series of similar works. We've considered a Wanderer's Völuspá, for example, as a companion to that with the Old Norse text of Völuspá and some related texts. So with the first two books, the answer is no. With the Wanderer's Havamal, the answer is yes. And possibly with some other future books, the answer may be yes. I'll typically make that pretty explicit in the way that I talk about the books. What kind of education do you have? Well, I have a bachelor's degree in Greek and Latin with a minor in linguistics from Texas Tech University, not a technical school. The tech is a superficial part of the name. I have a master's degree in historical linguistics from the University of Georgia, and I have a PhD in Scandinavian studies focusing on Old Norse philology, that is the study of Old Norse language and texts, from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I've also attended over the years various different programs at other universities. I took some classes at the University of Iceland in 2007 and at the University of Oslo in 2009. And of course, as with anyone, especially these days, a great deal of my education is from self-directed reading or from advisor-directed reading in grad school. Why did you study this stuff? Well, there's a long answer and a short answer here. To stick with a medium short answer, I became very interested in the history of languages at a young age, and also in Old Norse literature, which was especially triggered by my interest in the text Havamal, which I've now edited and translated in the Wanderer's Havamal. It's hard to say exactly what possessed me to go after this as a career, except perhaps I was just one of those kids who did well in school and wasn't exactly sure what else to do outside of school, and just kind of kept following his interests and got enough scholarships and teaching assistantships to keep going, and then found myself working as faculty at UCLA and then Berkeley and then CU. It has nothing to do with any family connection. I am not Scandinavian by any means. I have no known Scandinavian ancestors. It just happened to be something that caught my interest in my, I guess you could say, late youth, and was enough to propel me through a lot of study and work to specialize in it. Why did you leave UCLA, or why did you leave Berkeley? These questions get asked by people that I think assume there may be some kind of ulterior motive there. There really wasn't. It was simply these are temporary jobs. Most faculty these days are temps, right? Adjuncts, hired on a year-by-year basis and disposed of. You know, there's so many people with degrees in this stuff, and such a demand for the classes, but also just not that much funding for these positions. And so people kind of get hired and the jobs just sort of expire. In the case of UCLA, kind of bitterly and suddenly. In the case of Berkeley, it was more expected, and I had more time to transition and move to another job at University of Colorado. But keep in mind, most jobs in academia are temporary these days. Do you like, or are you a fan of, insert Viking or Norse related movie, TV show, video game, book, something here? Probably not. This is not what I do in my spare time. I tend not to to want to spend, what little time I might get in the evenings on more Viking or Norse stuff, right? Since I'm working pretty hard to bring good information about these things to people, often for free, it doesn't necessarily make me feel all that great to watch people making millions of dollars off of, off of it when they haven't invested the time and money in it that I have. It's not really a concern about accuracy. I understand that movies or TV shows need to make adjustments to make a story more exciting or for some dramatic license, but I just don't get into it. And then as far as music goes, I'm more of a classic country or outlaw country person. I don't really like metal. I have been happy to meet and befriend Einar Selvik from Wardruna. That's been a really interesting process. Really interesting person to get to know, very well informed, great guy. But it's just not the kind of thing that I'm usually driving around these mountains and valleys listening to. And as far as books go, I would much rather read about birds or dinosaurs or Colorado or guns, just something that interests me that's not related to work. Are you also through? No, I am not. I have an entire video discussing this question and why someone can be very interested in something without necessarily identifying themselves as it. What are your politics and religion? None of your business. But seriously, what does it matter? I'm here talking to you about Norse language and myth, things that are aspects of a society that no longer exists anymore. While you might occasionally find something that I'll say, especially in talking about the text Havamal, that could be considered a little bit more universally applicable, a little bit of wisdom for your own daily life, I'm really not here as an evangelist for one point of view or another. I'm here to talk about facts that I'm well familiar with. And there aren't left-wing facts or right-wing facts. There aren't also true facts and Christian facts, right? There are just facts. And if I tell you that I'm on one side or another of some hot-button cultural issue or what have you, and then I tell you that the sun is up, are you going to distrust that the sun is up because I disagree with you about some political issue that has nothing to do with the sun being up? I just think that it's unnecessary to get into these things. Maybe one day I'll expand the channel to get into more of my personal opinions about stuff, but I haven't seen much of a need to, simply because it alienates people without a reason. Like I said, I'm here to talk about facts, not about my opinions about things. And although my opinions are guessable about certain things, right? And now and then I need to make a statement. For instance, I've made a disclaimer that I'm not a racist. I don't have any, ethno-nationalist or fascist sympathies or anything like that, simply because, unfortunately, Norse mythology is very popular among extremists of that persuasion. I really don't want this to be a channel where people feel unwelcome or anything like that because they disagree with me about some particular issue. I have plenty of friends I disagree with about lots of issues. We can still be informed by each other and we can still care about each other as human beings. What's with the hat? Well, my grandfather, June Crawford, who was a big influence on my life in pretty much every direction except what I went to college for, always favored a Western hat and general Western style, and I suppose I just picked that up from him pretty directly. How can I do what you do? Well, the brusque but realistic answer is that you can't. Uh, a lot of people are fascinated by Old Norse, by Vikings, by Norse mythology. Too many for any of us to all, too many people for all of us to make money off of it. And in fact, extremely few people do make money off of it. I barely make money off of it, right? I have 4 jobs, 4 primary sources of income, right? So I teach at the University of Colorado. I make these videos, which are supported by Patreon. I have my books, and then I do a fair amount of movie, TV, and video game consulting. In roughly that order of net income, although gross income is a little bit higher on videos and Patreon than on CU. With any one of those pieces gone, I wouldn't be paying my bills. And it has been a desperate struggle over many years to get to a point where I am paying my bills. But of course, I'm, working myself to death by doing all these things. There are going to be fewer and fewer jobs in this every year, even while more and more people are interested. Don't buy the notion that if you're interested in something and it means a lot to you, that that is what you have to do in college. There are sometimes 100 applicants to jobs like mine at universities. Remember, I've taught at UCLA, at Berkeley, and at CU. None of those jobs are technically permanent, although the CU job is at least renewable. All of those were one-year positions. In the case of UCLA, it ended up lasting 3. In the case of Berkeley, it ended up lasting 2. But those universities always know you're replaceable. They know you'll work for not very much, and they're going to make you teach huge classes full of people that are just there for literature or history credit or something. You are not going to be, you are not Dumbledore in Hogwarts teaching, you know, very specialized classes. You're going to be teaching very, very basic classes, and you're going to get let go at a moment's notice and replaced at a moment's notice. These jobs are bad. The amount of debt that you need to get these jobs is bad. Don't do it. You can be fascinated by intellectual pursuits by this and do them as a hobby and get your degree in something someone will actually pay you to do, right? I myself strongly considered going back to school for something else, engineering perhaps, just something that I can actually show to an employer and get paid for doing. Don't underestimate the fact that if you walk around with a PhD in Scandinavian studies and you apply to quote-unquote normal jobs, you may in fact be considered less desirable because what on earth is wrong with you, you weirdo, that you spent that much time and that much money in school getting a degree in that. So people ask, how can I have a career like yours? The answer is, you can't, and don't try, right? I am desperately trying to do it myself, and I often feel like I'm losing ground every month. Well, I hope that's gone some way toward answering your questions about me, my channel, and my books, and I hope particularly that you'll check out the just released Wanderer's Havamal, my edition of Havamal with the Old Norse and English text side by side. The Old Norse text is closer to the text of the manuscript than I believe anyone else has produced, and still produce something you can use an Old Norse dictionary with. It's a really beautiful book. Here's the hardcover with the jacket off, and I hope you'll find a good place on your shelf for it, or in your jacket pocket or your truck or wherever you might want to take it. It's designed to be pretty portable. Well, for now, from beautiful Colorado, let me wish you all the best.